Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am your host, Courtney Anderson. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we have a show that's part of our series, The Joyful Art of Business. And of course, the joyful art of business is just one of the foundational principles of everything, all of our programs, everything we do. And the idea is simply this: business, whatever it is you do with your professional time, whether it's paid or volunteer, in whatever capacity, there should be a measurement or at least an assessment of your return on your investment of that time and your emotional state. And the suggestion is that there should be a positive emotional return on your investment. And sort of generically labeled that joy. The idea being that to sort of say, well, I have quoted good job, I can pay my bills and provide for myself and or my family and friends and pets and all my other issues, but I'm miserable, right? Like I hate it. I hate going there. My stomach hurts. I have a headache. I throw up every day. I'm despised. My boss. People get into that loop because they entirely discount this emotional, this physiological response, and just sort of only focus on, do I get money, or do I get attention? If it's not a job for money, maybe it's volunteer. The key is, okay, that's part of it, but it can't be all of it. And if you added this measurement of your own assessment or analytics on how do you feel, not a generic, how do you feel, where I'm not saying I don't want to get into a loop of people, well, I feel grateful to have a job, I went through this in life where I didn't have anything, or my grandparents, were barefoot and lived in a hut. I'm not getting to sort of that macro argument that we all should be grateful, because then there would be no line for anything. I mean, in other words, I couldn't argue don't do anything, because I could say, well, I should be grateful to be alive. So if I have a situation and I'm at a job and the people order me to put out an unsafe product that'll kill people, I should do it just because I should be grateful. It would negate any argument of ethics or even the law, right? Who cares what the law says? I should just be grateful and follow whatever orders I'm given. So that's not credible. What I'm saying is that once you get past sort of these basic issues of, yes, you need some ability to maintain sustenance or you're going to die. You're just going to starve. You need some ability to have enough fluids to stay hydrated or you're going to die. Now, once we start to get beyond that, then ideally I need some kind of stable shelter. Okay, so once you get beyond that, most people that I've worked with all over the world, everywhere from, India to South Africa to, Mexico to Spain, to Japan, I'm not talking, I'm not in there doing volunteer work with people who might be displaced or be in a situation where they don't have shelter or sufficient access to food or water. I'm with people at work, so they have these basic needs. Then it begins to be a different assessment, and that's who I'm talking to. What's the point in working or achieving, quote, any level of success if you're miserable? And people want to discount this. Well, people are just whiners. Well, some people are. But on the other hand, if you're so unhappy and you only have a finite amount of time in the physical body that you're in this life, then why would you invest in something that is not giving you anything but negative outcomes? And it can take such a physical toll and emotional toll on people. They can have breakdowns. Their body can suffer serious or sometimes fatal consequences of just sort of prolonged exposure to stress, and why do it? So the joyful art of business is again, foundation for so much. In fact, almost everything that I do in the area of business and organizational issues. This specific episode topic is, what they call you is one thing. What you answer to is something else. What they call you is one thing. What you answer to is something else. And this is a quote from a poet, Lucille Clifton, a U.S. poet who passed away in 2010, so relatively recently. Many prestigious awards. I put some information in the show notes and encourage you to if you aren't familiar with her work, to at least read a little bit about her and or some of her seminal work. I often, the show topics come, from community members, suggestions that people have for programs and things of that nature, but a lot of them come from my own interests. I mean, I've been reading, Lucille Clifton since, oh goodness, probably when I was a teenager. And so this is just one of my favorite poets, and it certainly is a quote I think that speaks to so many of the issues that we deal with in trying to resolve to allow people to surpass their goals. So let's walk through this. The idea here is that what they call you is one thing. So generically here, that they is whoever they are in your world, right? It could be people you work with. It could be people in your social circle. It could be people in your family. It could be people in your neighborhood. It doesn't really matter. They. What they call you is one thing. My interpretation of this is I cannot control what other people think about me. I cannot control if other people think about me. And I certainly cannot control what other people call me. Now, that might be what they call me in their mind. So there might be someone, who is looking at me and thinking about me specifically and thinking, look at her. She is an idiot. She is the ugliest, most idiotic, horrible person ever. I can't stand her. Yuck. Okay. I have zero control over any of that. To the best of my knowledge, there's not any method or technology or anything I can do, or I have the ability to go and either prevent someone from thinking something about me, or to prevent them from speaking without, I guess, maybe muzzling them or paralyzing them or some sort of, criminal act. I don't have anything to do with what they think about me. I don't have anything to do with what they call me. What they call me in their mind, and to be very honest, I don't have any control over what they call me out loud, what they say. Now, there may be consequences to what they say. So if I'm at work and I'm an employee in the United States or the EU or many parts of the world, and some people start to use specific language maybe about my gender, and they start saying specifically something like, women are dummies, I hate all women, I think women are stupid and they should never work ever, and that's why I'm going to fire you. In many parts of the world, then that, even though they can say what they want. I can't control them. I can't make them not say it before it comes out of their mouth. But there's going to be consequences in many parts of the world. And I've done lots of programs, and I do lots of professional service to people from different perspectives. So whether it's a legal perspective in the parts of the world that I practice as a lawyer, or it's of a sort of a larger business law perspective internationally. Ideally, even if it's not illegal, it's just probably not a good idea, because I, am competing for the best minds, and I'm competing globally. So I want, if I'm an engineering firm, I want the best engineers. If I'm, in retail, I want the best retail experts, and it's really kind of counterproductive for me to put a situation in my environment where I am making people uncomfortable and unhappy and miserable, and also at some point they're going to leave, and they're also unmotivated while they are there. So there's a bottom line reason for it not being effective, and of course in many parts of the world it's illegal to make decisions based on someone's gender or religion or whatnot. So again, though, that is only the after effect, the consequence of what somebody says or calls me. I don't have anything to do with the process of what they call me. They think it in their mind, and they, their body, they sort of communicate to their mouth that you need to move, you need to use your vocal cords and your tongue and your lips to form these words, or these sounds. I don't have any of this. I can't control it. I have nothing to do with it. Now, there may be, again, consequence afterwards, and what they call me is one thing. And what I'm saying and what I'm putting forward here is, so many people get so caught up in this part of the scenario, just obsessed with what other people have called them. I can't believe they said that, or, how dare they have said that, or, do they know who I am or what I've done or the work I put into this, or, I've been at this company 35 years and I can't believe it. Okay. All of this, being aware of the feeling, the reaction to what someone calls us is healthy. Right? It's not healthy and we get people who do the other, they, suppress things. So I'll talk to people and then they'll say, well, I just, I didn't even really notice it, and that's not even realistic. The person was called horrible things, and everyone publicly heard it. So they're being unhealthy by suppressing, their emotional, reaction. We all have the emotions, and they're healthy that we're aware of them. The challenge, though, is once we're aware of what happens and we acknowledge and value our own feelings, then what do we do with it? And to me, again, this concept, the quote has two parts. First part is what they call you is one thing. Second part is what you answer to is something else. My perspective, again, is I don't have anything that I can do, and I don't spend any time thinking about or worrying about or fretting about what they call me, because I just can't do anything about it. I mean, people think what they think. I think all kind of things. I wouldn't even want, if they ever do come up with the technology, or if they have it secretly now, but they've not told anyone, but they share it with all of us later, that they could, sort of some kind of way, I don't even, this isn't accurate, but broadcast what we're thinking, like literally, just like broadcast the thoughts in our heads out loud. If someone could do that, I would be horrified. I think all kind of things. Sometimes they're just silly and illogical. Sometimes they're mean. Sometimes they're just hurtful to myself or to other people, or to anything. I mean, I just think stupid stuff. So I'm not alone in this. I don't think. I would never want anyone to know what I think. I don't even. That's why there's the gap between all the stuff you think and then that little bit of stuff that comes out of your mouth or your body language. There's supposed to be a big period where we measure and assess before there's some sort of broadcast to the world. Because a lot of, if not the majority of what I think, and probably I surmise what most of us think, is just, rambling, just rambling thoughts. They're not poorly formed, they're not conclusions, they're not actionable, they're fleeting. We don't want that broadcast. Again, I hope they never either share that they can do that, or that they ever figure out, they meaning scientists, technology, whatever. So I table and leave alone the whole part of life with what they call me, because what can I do? The second part is what you answer to. Now, this is something I find to be powerful. And it allows us to define ourselves, right? We define ourselves. I can't define myself and how other people think of me, because they may look at me or hear me or read about something I've written and think things based on all kinds of things. My perceived age or gender or color or size or ethnicity or national origin or anything. I mean, who knows? Or even, what the color of an outfit I'm wearing, or some people hear my voice and can't stand the pitch or tone or whatever. Like, none of this is something I can control. So again, I just leave it alone, and I don't invest any time in it or worry about it, because what could I do? To me, it's like arguing about, how can I control the breeze outside? Well, I can't. I can adjust to it. If it's really breezy and windy, I'll put on a sweater or a jacket. If it's not breezy at all and I think I'm going to get a little hot, I'll wear something, that's cooler. I can adjust to it. But I can't sit around lamenting and crying and screaming and having a fit about the breeze. I mean, I don't have any control over it. And I think that looking at the behavior that other people engage in from more of a formula perspective, it does make it easier to make decisions, to react, and to also remember that you're trying to reach and surpass your own goals. So you're not going to want somebody, one person or two people, or I don't care, a million people who call you something. You don't want that to negatively impact your individual trajectory in life, your goals, and what you're trying to accomplish, because you get obsessed and sidetracked with what they're calling you. You can't do anything about it. So, okay. The part that I do find, again, to be the uplifting, inspirational, motivational, but more than that, the pragmatic part of this is what I answer to. So, a couple of examples. Many years ago, I was in the United States working with some corporate education. There was an organization where there were some people who were using insults. They were calling people insulting words. Now, insults are always going to be subjective, right? Because depends on where you live and who you are and your life experience. So, and what language you speak. I mean, So here we go. So there was a person at this place and was calling people the word boy. So he was a male, but he was calling other male people who he were, peer coworkers. He was calling them the word boy. And boy, like a young child. Now the problem was they weren't young children. They were adults. He was an adult. They were adults. This is an adult workplace. So it wasn't like he was 47 and they were 6 years old. Maybe that would have been understandable, but it wouldn't have made sense though. Then the 6-year-olds wouldn't have had a full-time job at this large organization. The reality was the gentleman was only calling some coworkers the word boy, and he was calling coworkers the word boy who happened to have probably several things in common. I don't know their whole life history, but they did have sort of obviously in common in that they were all a similar skin color, which was a different skin color from the man who was calling them boy. So the people who he was calling them boy were horribly offended and upset, and there's a long history in many parts of the world of different words who don't seem like they would be offensive on the face of them, but they were used in ways that they have a history where they carry with them meaning that can be or it was intended to be offensive. And the word boy in the United States, especially for people who were black or African American or whatever, the terminology would be, depending on how old you were, Negro or, there's different words, but sort of the darker skinned individuals, males, were called that word, boy, through many historical periods, and it was a way, I think, I wasn't, alive firsthand anecdotally to experience this, and I'm not a male, but from what I understand from the historical context it was a way for society to remind people that even though you're an adult, a full-grown man, you'll never be an equal, and so your status is of less than, and one of the ways that we would sort of remind you of that is by calling you boy. Okay, so the person at work, I'm not saying they were a historian and knew all of this, but they were old enough to understand that word wasn't used for everyone in the community. It was only used for certain people, and the person was using it at work only for certain people who all shared this similar complexion. So that was a challenge. People were very upset when he was calling them. I totally understood their perspective. Part of this was that it was behavior that did create legal issues in the U.S. because of these laws about we're not going to make decisions at work based on someone's color, ethnicity, national origin, religion, gender, all this kind of stuff. That's part of it. But the other thing that was, I think, powerful was one of the things that the people who he was calling this word to that they used that was pretty effective in some way was that they don't respond to it. And I literally have had discussions with that gentleman in that organization, but I have had the same discussion with, I can't even count how many people over the years who behave like this. And they'll say to me, so the person who's using the word boy, right, he and people in his similar situation who use similar type of language, they'll say things to me like, well, what's the big deal? People are so sensitive, and, I mean, what am I supposed to call them, right? I mean, come on. And then I'll say, well, what about their name? And I'm not saying that sort of, flippantly. I mean it, right? Like, there's the easy answer. But then there are people I've had to go do corporate education programs where people intentionally are mispronouncing somebody's name. And then they'll say at work something like, oh, I'm sorry, I just can't pronounce your name. Well, that's not logical. It's just sounds. So if you practice and you ask the other person, oh, how do I pronounce your name again? And then they'll make a noise. And then you just repeat that noise until it sounds exactly like the noise they made, and then that's the noise you make whenever you call them their name. I know that might sound a little bit elementary, and almost some people say that's offensive. It's not, because the argument that I get from people who are habitually, repetitively mispronouncing somebody's name, and there are people who will do this for years. And then they'll say things like, well, I can't pronounce their name. They're Polish. I can't pronounce that name, or I can't pronounce that name. I don't know how to speak whatever language they're, wherever they're from. Come on. It's offensive. It's disrespectful. And of course, it's not logical. Unless you have some sort of physical malady that would prevent you from verbalizing, you can make those sounds and pronounce their name. You just don't want to. So the argument and the point is this. there are many occasions in our lives, at work, at home, in our social lives, hopefully not at home, but once we're adults and have our own home that we create. But certainly outside that, where people will say and call us things that are, either inappropriate, offensive, silly, stupid, hurt our feelings, cruel, whatever. One time I was getting ready to give a big speech, and it was in conjunction with an organization that was putting on a seminar, and one of the executives introduced me to an audience and said something like, he was introducing me, and he pronounced my name correctly, which was, nice and good. But then he said, he used the word sassy to describe me, sassy. Now, that might have been a compliment. It might have been that his interpretation was that was a way to say that I'm high energy and I'm assertive, and okay. And maybe that's where it was coming from. But there's also, again, a narrative where there's a perception and some stereotypes where certain people are, they're funny, they're sort of comic relief, they're sassy and outspoken and silly, but they're not credible. They're not the person who makes the decision. They're not powerful, but they're just sort of like a funny sort of court jester type person. And that is not at all what my purpose is. And my purpose is to entertain and to make things fun and sometimes just to be funny. But I'm always doing that from a perspective of all of the knowledge and the credentials and experience and expertise I have. So it wasn't necessarily received well, in my perspective, being labeled as sassy, of all the things that someone could have come up with. But on the other hand, here's the deal. I can't control what people, again, call me. I did understand this. Being at that professional event was a wonderful opportunity for my business. That's why I was there. I wasn't there for that person who said the sassy thing. It had nothing to do with them. It's about my own trajectory, my own goals, my own mission that I'm on. I'm in control. I've had many other shows about how much control and how much free will, and we certainly continue to debate that. But as much as there is, I want to exert as much power over my circumstances in my life as possible. I want to determine my destiny as much as possible. Put that in whatever framework you have. I want to define myself. So I can't stop somebody else from calling me whatever name. But the point is that the fact that I was at that professional opportunity that did result in continued outlets for me to grow and mature and succeed professionally in terms of my skills, economically, these are all really great things. So I'm not going to not be at an event. I'm not going to not take part in something that could be a wonderful part of the larger picture and framework of my success and my goals in life and my growth just because people call me something. And it's the same thing about the gentleman who was at the organization calling people adult men boy repetitively even after they asked him to stop. One is you don't answer to it. And two, you understand, and they understood, I believe, after working with them, they have their own individual lives. So that work and that organization being part of it was part of their overall trajectory for their own surpassing their own goals, for their own intellectual growth, professional skill development, economic, financial opportunities. So yes, was this person behaving in a way that was offensive? Yes. Were they behaving in a way that potentially, and I don't know, I wasn't in the other person's, I'm not in anybody's mind. Do I think because the gentleman kept repeating the behavior even though he had been told to stop and asked to stop and requested to stop and had been written up and asked to stop and he still kept doing it? Do I think maybe he had some sort of negative desire or motivation to either hurt people or degrade people, or I don't know exactly what his, the specifics of it were? Yeah, because it wasn't like he didn't know. He had repetitively been given opportunities to just stop doing it and he wouldn't. So I don't, I would suspect maybe there was some other motive. Maybe it made him feel better about himself to be able to keep thinking or feeling that he was making other people feel bad about themselves. And that's a sad thing. We've done many programs about that vicious cycle people get caught in, where they get to a point in their lives where they aren't living their dreams and they haven't surpassed their goals, and they start to perceive that their only options are to just start inflicting the misery and the pain, disappointment, and regret they feel on other people, and it's just sad. So I do feel full empathy for that. But the key is the people that worked at the organization that were being referred to and called the inappropriate language in their mind and that they'd expressed shouldn't be derailed. They shouldn't quit the job or react in such a way that they go and beat the person up and then they are arrested for assault and then they're fired and you've got to look big picture. And when you look at movements around the world, and I'm going to pick more recent history simply because we have a better record, right? We've got literally a film from recent movements around the world, political movements, civil rights movements, anything that's sort of a societal change, right? Same thing with the organizational change, but that's on a much smaller scale and it doesn't impact the larger culture necessarily. But when you look at it, and many of these movements, especially nonviolent movements, right? It was all about this idea you keep your eyes on the prize. You keep your eyes on the prize. And what's the prize? The prize was the big picture. So whatever it was, if it was some part of the world where people were looking to change the government or looking to change specific laws or looking to change different cultural practices, you keep your eyes on the prize. So maybe somebody is calling you horrible things and maybe even physically assaulting you in many of these instances in these larger social change issues. But you understand big picture that has nothing to do with you, A, and B, you're going to not answer to it. And there's a bigger goal. And we all have that in our individual lives. So when someone calls us something and and let's say it really is just so blatantly intended to be offensive or dehumanizing or cruel or, to inflict pain, okay, I can't do anything about it in terms of stopping that person from having done it. Now, I can react to it. There may be some sort of consequence where I'm not going to be around them again or they're not going to have the opportunity to say that to me again, depending on, where we are. It may be a situation where I have no options in terms of, other than maybe it's a social thing and I just don't hang out with those people. But the reality is, what do I answer to? And does what someone else call me have any impact on what I call myself? And my argument is no, it doesn't. It shouldn't. Because it doesn't make any sense. I mean, some people may have some motive that, again, that's deeply rooted in their own personal narrative. And many times, again, as I said a little bit ago, when you sit and you talk with people who are sort of in a lot of misery and behaving in ways that's really counterproductive, they do have an explanation. And if you listen to them, which is what most people just really want, they'll talk to you about a life of usually lots of disappointments and pain that have taken them to a place where they feel they have no other resource, no other recourse, no other options, and they've sort of given up. And so they become abusive or inappropriate with their language and behavior, but it's coming from a real place of pain. And again, I understand that. My argument, though, is that that's what so many of the programs I do are intended to try to fix before it gets to that point. How can we get you where you're surpassing your goals? Because when that happens, you tend to then be in a different behavior pattern in your life where you have different outcomes. For yourself, you treat yourself differently, but you treat other people differently. You're not going around insulting or screaming or calling people names or degrading or doing that because you don't have any need or desire to inflict pain on other people, because your needs are met, or at least some of them. And so there's so much research on the impact of what other people call us and how we internalize it, that women as a group, tend to score differently on different tests if they're told before the test that women don't score as well. Women aren't as good at math, for instance, as men. Then you tell the women that, and they go take the test, and their scores are lower. You have the same thing with different ethnic groups. They're told, so-and-so ethnic group doesn't do as well, and then you take the test, and of course they don't do as well. Well, yeah, you just told them that. There was some groundbreaking research in the U.S. A couple of decades ago when there was a societal change being debated. And the argument was, were people in some of these minority, in terms of numbers, there were less of them than the majority group, but they were also stood out from the majority group by their complexion. Did it have any negative impact on their own sort of self-image and their way they saw themselves, which would also potentially impact the way they make choices, right? Because if I think I'm a horrible, yucky, horrible person, I may make different choices than if I think I'm an awesome, wonderful person. And there's lots of research, but one of them that was so powerful that was in the courts that was brought up in the courts and some of these legal arguments about these issues was this idea where the scientists went and took little children, little girls, and they gave them dolls, an option to pick a doll. And, the whole idea is little girls, especially in cultures where this is sort of part of the cultural norm, typically enjoy playing with dolls, and they dress them up and they make them pretty. I myself, when I was younger, did play with dolls and Barbies and all this kind of stuff. And they went and took the little girls and they sort of showed them some dolls, and there were some dolls that looked like the majority group in the United States, and just in terms of numbers, in terms of complexion. And then there were some that looked like the minority group. And the minority group, sort of darker complected, richer complected. And so the little girls, who themselves were in the richer complected, darker complected group, rejected the dolls that looked like them and said, these dolls are ugly and horrible. I'm not giving exact, but basically that was the gist. Like, that's an undesirable, ugly thing. I don't want that. I want the pretty one, the good one, the one that looks like the majority group. Now, many people look at these types of research outcomes and think, well, geez, you needed to research? This is like so obvious. If you sit around all day and tell somebody, we all just sort of experience this, right? That you're an idiot, a horrible person, and you do that from the time they're little children, there's going to be an outcome where they, at some point, are impacted by that. That's why, a lot of the child abuse and emotional abuse is so destructive, right? So it's the same thing in a larger society. If you tell people over and over again that this is undesirable and those people look like that, then they think they're undesirable. And lo and behold, you're going to get not great outcomes necessarily in terms of self-esteem and all these things. So it seems kind of obvious, I guess, for many of us, but I guess it isn't, because societies and families and individual people do this right now. People still do this. They call people horrible, negative things. They do it repetitively. And it causes negative outcomes because the people, especially young children, they believe it, especially if they don't hear anything else. So the consequences of not thinking through this concept and not understanding the power of it in your personal life, in your family, with your friends, in your community, with your work, in your larger society, in your nation, or wherever you are part of a society, it can't be overlooked. And it's easy for some people who have a certain sort of sense of self to say, well, yeah, I don't care what they call me. I'm going to just focus on what I answer to. But it's very difficult for the majority of people who want to fit in, who want to be accepted, who desperately want peer, acceptance and to feel like they're, quote, good enough. So this episode, I just had to share. It's one of my favorite poets, and again, one of my favorite concepts, this idea that, what they call you is one thing, what you answer to is something else. And what do you answer to? How do you define yourself? As always, you can come to CourtneyAnderson.com for more information and to share any feedback. Thank you.